Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. A good topic for you today? Let's do it. What's the scariest thing you've ever experienced? Please remember to like, share, hype, and subscribe.
I once rode my motorcycle from Phoenix to Provo. In and of itself, that's not really scary. It actually would have probably been a thoroughly enjoyable experience. However, several things ended up combining to make it terrifying. I left too late in the day and severely misjudged just how long of a motorcycle ride that was for one shot. It was the longest trip I'd ever taken. My handlebars are very low, which makes for an uncomfortable riding position. And by the time I reached the AZUT border, my neck was not happy. I stopped in Caneb for dinner, and when I set out again, I found my headlight was burnt out and the sun was setting. I bought the brightest flashlight I could find at a gas station. It was actually bright, if not brighter, than my headlight. Electrical taped it to my handlebars and headed down the 89. A few hours later, the bright flashlight had eaten through the batteries, grown dim, and eventually died, making the small, curvy highway downright scary in the almost moonless night. I decided to cut over to the 15 in Salina, thinking with the increased traffic, any other vehicle on the road, I could borrow the light from their headlights. The last hour or so felt like a nightmarish midnight race with death as I ghosted a car doing 90 to 95 with no headlight, hungry, cold, cramping, and exhausted. I was almost sideswiped twice by semis that did not see me, and by the time I collapsed on my sister's couch in Provo, I felt like I had escaped a situation where ride or die were my options. For the next 2 days, I felt like I had torn several muscles in my neck, and I couldn't fully flatten my right hand. I had COVID pretty bad. My lungs were filled with fluid, and my condition was getting worse. I would cough often when the fluid tickled my throat, but I was only able to inhale at like 15% capacity, so I couldn't work up the breath to clear the fluid. I was controlling all of my breaths manually to not exceed 15% and trigger another coughing attack. I had a really bad coughing fit one night and told my mom to crank the oxygen to 11 because I'm about to pass out. I felt that if I passed out I would die. My body would try to breathe normally if I was unconscious, triggering another coughing fit, and I would have little control at that point. I asked to be taken to the hospital immediately. I crapped my pants. It was the most terrifying experience of my life. My condition got worse every day at the hospital, but I eventually began to recover after about 7 days of not being able to move, breathe, eat, or crap on my own. December 7th, 1941, in Honolulu, Hawaii. A series of loud explosions in the neighborhood and the sound of a lot of airplanes in the air. Women running out of their homes screaming and in tears. Kids crying from seeing adults in panic. People grabbing whatever they held precious and dumping them into the cars and rushing off to who knows where. Then a horribly loud explosion across the street as a school building exploded into fire and dust as a shell from a cannon from Pearl Harbor struck that building. There was a cacophony of loud sounds everywhere as fire trucks and police vehicles with sirens and military vehicles with their horns blaring. Everyone was fleeing their homes. Except our family, as my dad said, this is a small island. Where can we possibly go to hide and be safe? So we took cover in the basement of our home to wait out the attack on the island and spent our time in prayer and fear. I was in Antalya Airport in August 2016. A few days earlier, there had been a suicide bombing at a wedding elsewhere in the country that had killed over 50 people, so terrorism was still fresh on everyone's mind. I'd literally just walked through the doors and was queuing at the security checkpoint to get into the airport proper when all of a sudden a scream came from deeper in the airport, followed by several more and someone shouting, "Run!" It was like something out of a zombie movie. The horde of people that came around the corner from where they'd been browsing around the duty-free shops, barreling through the security checkpoint and trying to get out of the airport. I ended up getting knocked over and trampled, but It wouldn't have helped me anyway, since with hundreds of people trying to force through a couple of automatic doors, they weren't opening, and everyone was trapped. I don't remember whether they were pried open or broken, but eventually I found myself running down the road leading up to an airport and then grouping back up with the people I was with. Turns out, there wasn't any threat. A machine in the Burger King had exploded and started a fire. People understandably mistook what it was and panicked, which quickly spread and caused a stampede. The moment where I was one of the last people in the airport trying to get out was the only time I was certain I was about to die. But thankfully, I got away with a few bruises. The statement Antalya Airport gave was that a fire broke out and everyone was evacuated calmly with no injuries. But back inside, after everything went back to normal, everything was trashed. There were several pools of blood from people who'd been trampled worse than I, and multiple people were taken out on stretchers. I was in the Kensington section of Philly about to score dope, but waiting in my car for my buddy to buy cigarettes when two cops ran up with their guns drawn. One ran ahead, but the other drew down on me, finger on the trigger. The other cop shouted something to him, and they went up the block and down an alley. No idea what the deal was. My buddy came out, and luckily the dope spot was essentially on the other side of Kensington. This was more than a decade ago, and I haven't touched dope in years. That was the scariest thing I saw while I was strung out, but the worst thing I saw was a woman and her two young sons, one with special needs, living in an apartment with literally thousands of roaches in it. I have nightmares about how these kids turned out. When I was about 3, I think, 45 now, bear with me, living in Eureka, California. It's on the coast and north in the Redwoods. Just down the way from our house was a place that built tree houses, big ones that circled the entire tree with a staircase easily 100 feet off the ground. I got suckered into climbing up one by older kids in the neighborhood. Peer pressure is a bitch. I got to the doorway of the treehouse and only then got a good look at how high up I was. I froze. Couldn't move at all, just completely paralyzed with fear. Took my dad about 30 minutes to finally come get me and then spent another 30 or so standing over me as I crawled backwards on my hands and knees, swearing over to just get up and stop being up. See, good times. 42 years later, and I can still feel the wood under my hands. And that, kids, is where phobias come from.
I have one for sure. I'm not going to share it publicly, but I'm thinking about it right now. And it's pretty disturbing. Anyway, what's yours? Or, something you've heard.
It was a warm summer day. We went to a nearby lake to spend a few days in our tent. My little daughter, a sweet little girl with blonde hair and beautiful green eyes, was happy to spend a few days with swimming and bicycle rides. I took her by the hand and went for a little walk to explore the camping site. Somebody had set out a place for himself and made up a fence out of branches of the surrounding bushes. The car was in camouflage, his hammock was in camouflage, and even the roof of the kennel for his dogs was colored like this. The Pitbull and a Great Dane were chained to a tree. As I came near to this makeshift fence, the dogs started to run in our direction. In my imagination, I saw me bitten by the Great Dane and my sweet little daughter's face chewed away by the Pitbull. We had no chance to run away, because the leash was way too long, so I decided to stand motionless, hoping for the best. Luckily, my daughter complied. The dogs approached us and started to sniff us from head to toe. I relaxed and thought to myself, maybe I had seen too much horror movies. I decided not to move, just in case, and my little daughter did the same. Then the owner's girlfriend came running from behind her tent to get the dogs. She was pale in the face and frightened. The dogs did not really react to her commands, and she had trouble to get them inside the kennel. In this moment, I realized that my imagination maybe was not too strong. When I was 8 years old in June or July of 2003, I was getting ready for daycare one day, and my mom was getting ready for her job as a nurse, and she was making my lunch. I remember specifically it was Chef Boyardee ravioli. I was in the living room, and my mom was in the kitchen when I heard a crash from out front door. And when I turned and looked, I saw a man's hand covered in cuts and blood, reaching through the glass that he had just broken. He unlocked the door and let himself in, and I saw that it was my mom's ex-boyfriend, G, and he had a gun in the waistband of his pants. He was dripping blood onto the living room floor, and I wasn't immediately aware of the danger, so I grabbed a roll of paper towels from the dinner room table, and I gave them to him and asked him to sit down because he was hurt. G complied, and my mom started to call the cops, which caused him to look me in the eye and say, "I wouldn't have to kill your mom if she wasn't such a bitch." That was when I realized that G was planning on killing my mom in front of me. But I took him off guard by handing him paper towels. If I hadn't, or if my mom had been in the living room, I would have watched her die that day. He ended up walking out the front door pretty quickly, and when the police arrived, my mom and I were put in the back of a patrol car for our safety, and we were taken to the police station to make a statement. On the way, we watched as the police located G and his truck, and they taxed him multiple times to get him to stand down. I also found out later that my mom's sister, who introduced them, gave G the gun in California before he drove it back to Pennsylvania to try to kill my mom. And it was loaded with extra rounds in the truck. I was babysitting my baby brother while my parents took my sister to dance. It was his nap time, and I had finally got him to sleep. As soon as I go downstairs, I hear him crying. Midway up the stairs, he starts laughing and I hear someone shush him. I shout and sprint up the stairs. As I enter my parents' room, which is right at the top, I see someone jump out of an open window. I called the police and my parents, and this happened the moment I got downstairs from getting him to sleep. Meaning they were in my parents' room the entire time. I was getting him to stop, waiting for me to leave. How the hell they got in there, I couldn't tell you, but holy shit, that was terrifying. And to make things worse, other houses on our street with small children were reporting things like this. I was on a plane and the flight was only supposed to be 45 minutes, but due to bad weather, we couldn't land until around 2 hours after being up in the sky with the crazy turbulence. There was this one moment where the flight attendants made an in-flight shop promotion through the announcer and suddenly got cut off by the pilot from the cockpit asking them to be seated and buckled up. I remember my mom and I just looking at each other thinking that this is it, the plane's going to crash and we're going to die, but thankfully we made it out alive. I feel traumatized, and since then I always have anxiety every time I'm being on a plane, especially on a long hour flight. I tried to sleep always, but it's not working, even with some sickness pill. When I was 17, I almost died from sniffing spray paint mixed with drinking a shit ton of alcohol. I could feel oxygen slowly cutting off from my brain the more I inhaled. The highs you get are short, so I just kept taking more, and because of the alcohol, didn't realize I should have stopped way earlier. All I remember is texting my friend and partner that I love them and then trying to tell me what to do to get sober, but my vision was blurred, so I couldn't really read anything. All I knew was that I shouldn't go to sleep, as that could be my end. I stayed up for as long as I could in the hopes to fall asleep a bit more sober. I couldn't even cry. I was just so stressed that I couldn't do anything or feel anything but stress. 11 years of suicidalness, and the moment I get close to death, I get so scared and think about all I still wanted to do, about the time I wish I could have spent with my loved ones. Luckily, I made it out alive. Had a few more close to death experiences due to substance abuse, but the first one hits the hardest. In college, we were having a party when someone right outside my house opened fire. I was sleeping in bed when I woke to what I thought were fireworks. This is a few hours after heavy drinking, so I was cashed out. About 4 shots in, I realized it's gunfire. So my old college house was super shitty and had the thinnest walls, so the shooting right outside sides sounds like it's really right outside. After he shoots 7 to 8 shots, there's a pause, and you can hear hundreds of people running through our yard screaming. After a few seconds, he reloads and starts firing again. This time I'm fully awake, and I'm in full flight or fight mode, thinking if he comes into our house, what do I do? My friends are in the bathroom floor, and I'm up top. So, would I try to make a weapon, hide, or hop off the second story, etc.? Anyways, he shoots about a total of 21 times. There was 2 guys, but I didn't look at the window, so found out after the fact. At the end, we heard the cops pull on, and I could hear them shouting, "Put the gun down! Hands on your head!" etc. After several minutes after the cops arrived, I decided to look outside. The shooting happened literally 10 feet from our front door. Thank God no one was killed, but 2 were shot. Went to some other country with church to learn more about God, though for me it was all about the free food and a free vacation to some warmer country. We went to a place called Blue Lagoon, I think, a beach place thing, and we started swimming. I was extremely far behind, and apparently you were supposed to make a right turn once you had exited the mountain tunnel. However, I did not see them, so I took a left turn instead. They never gave us instructions on where to go beforehand. So, after swimming for a few hundred meters, my muscles were burning and I was so incredibly exhausted, I was contemplating just giving up and drown. Of course, grabbing the mountain wall was a good option, though I'd rather not get stung by a gang of those black spiked ball thingies. They were covering about nearly the whole mountain wall that was submerged. Everything hurt, even breathing at that point, and I was scared and sad. I didn't want to die, much less alone, knowing fully well it could have ended differently. I never felt so good and god-awfully helpless. Everything seemed so hopeless. I managed to eventually swim to the other side of the mountain, where there was another swimming place. It took like 5 minutes-ish to give or take to walk from that bath place to where I went in. But mountains be mountains, and it stretched quite far into the sea. I think it took me about 30 minutes to an hour to swim there to give or take, though it felt closer to 3 to 5 hours. Also worth noting that there was this very shallow place before the other swimming place that I had to climb and balance over. Though it hurt my feet, and I scratched my leg on some not-so-kind rocks. Can't remember why, but I couldn't sit down the rest there, nor could I lean on anything. I finally made it to the other side and laid down in this little puddle of water. Prior, while I was still swimming, I thought I'd feel amazing that I finally had reached the other side, like euphoria or something, but no. I felt nothing special, just relief and an intense desire to not enter the sea again. Though I've had many bad interactions with the sea before, all of them being near drown experiences as well, this one was by far the worst. The other times I survived due to outside intervention or sheer fucking luck, but this time, no amount of luck could help me, and where I was basically a dead zone, as in no boats came anywhere near where I was. Not as far as I could see or hear at least, except for that one cargo ship in the distance. They give out some surprising and unwelcoming waves. Minus 100 out of 10. Would not recommend. Every turn counts. Oh, I think a story that could compete actually with this one. When I was like 6, I think, and my sister was 1, she was sleeping in the little baby carriage thingy and it was storming. You could barely see 10 meters in front of you. My mom was unpacking some stuff when a sudden gust of wind broke the brakes on it and sent my sister Carriage flying away before I had a chance to react. I ran up to my mom, who was still unpacking, to tell her, but at first she thought that I was just bothering her. Some chasing later, we watch as my sister's carriage gets thrown down the side of land, rolling down the quite sharp rocks and down into the sea. My mom jumped down the rocks and got my sister back up. I think Mom still has a scar from that till this day. Now, miraculously, my sister was unscathed, and apparently we went back into the car and just sat there as my mom held us while we were waiting for my dad's arrival on boat. I still remember the image of my sister's little carriage in the distance. I remember looking down into the sea halfway thinking she was dead. Weird how both of these stories have water and feeling hopeless in them.